Yatta, Rueben Berg here, Metropolitan Member for the First People's Assembly of Victoria, and hearing a lot of talk at the moment around the conversation to do with the voice and the referendum and treaty and truth. And so I've just tried to put together a bit of a presentation to share some of my thoughts about all this conversation. And I think it's really important to note that these are just my own personal thoughts on these things, and this is based on the information that I've received and heard about and looked into so far. But with all these things, I am, and I hope everyone is, willing to listen to new ideas, listen to new information, listen to new arguments, so we can try and get what we think is the best outcome for our community, because I think that's what we're all striving for. But so this is just a presentation of where I see things at from my perspective, and really keen to hear other people's thoughts and really encourage other people out there to look into this information themselves and hear what some of the other views are directly. And hopefully we can continue to have this conversation around this really important issue. So this is just some of my thoughts about the referendum and voice. So I think we as a community, as First Nations peoples here in Australia, we've got lots of different goals. I think we're a diverse group of people. We aspire to different things, but I think there's a common goal amongst us as a broad community, and that's to try and achieve better outcomes for our community for now and for the future. And I think a way of kind of summing up what those aspirations look like is one of the things at the top of the mountain that we're kind of trying to aspire to is the realisation of the goals and the rights set out within the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that's a really powerful document. And if people haven't looked at that before, I really encourage people to go out and take a look at that. And one of the underlying principles within that is that the idea of self-determination is that Indigenous peoples globally, including here in Australia, should have the right to control things that directly affect them. Indigenous people should make decisions about Indigenous issues. And that's a fundamental principle set out within the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But there's a whole suite of other things around there. And by achieving those goals, I think that has a flow-on effect of allowing us to address all those other key issues that we're well aware of within our community that need to be addressed around the criminal justice system, around child welfare, around land rights, around water rights, around all those things that are really important to us as a community, education and health, just to name a few. All those things, I think, can be a flow-on effect from realising the rights under United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and realising those rights as a minimum. So in terms of trying to achieve that goal, the top of the mountain, the realisation of those rights, there are lots of different things that you can achieve along the way. One of those things that you can achieve along the way is voice. Another thing that we can strive to achieve along the way is treaty. And another of those things is truth. So voice, treaty, truth, the three things we've been hearing about commonly as part of these conversations. And so that's the conversation that's being had at a national level, but it's also being had at the moment at a state level at many different states across the nation. And particularly here in Victoria, we're doing a lot of significant work to progress this stuff. So we've got some really powerful work being done by the First People's Assembly of Victoria, which I'm really proud to be a part of. And through that, we've been able to work with government, and there's now been established the Yuruk Justice Commission. So we've got treaty elements addressed there, we've got truth elements addressed there, and through the work we're doing on treaty, voice is also part of that conversation here at the state level. And if you are interested in what we're doing at this state level and you are eligible to enrol to vote, I really encourage you to enrol to vote to be a member of the First People's Assembly of Victoria. We've got elections coming up soon and we really want as many people to participate in that. But so that's where we're at the state level. There's some really powerful work already happening around those three elements. But I'm more specifically talking today about the national level. And at the national level, there is a really powerful conversation happening around a pathway to get us from where we are now to voice. And that's just part of the pathway to achieve those rights under the UN Declaration. But we've been offered this opportunity by the Commonwealth Government to have a voice through a referendum, to have a voice. And to my mind, if we can achieve that voice, that will be really powerful in enabling us to then progress from there to achieve treaty outcomes, to progress from there to achieve truth outcomes. And I'm hopeful that if we do get that voice, that can also help us after treaty, perhaps, after truth, perhaps, to progress further up and get an even more powerful voice, one that can have greater rights than the ones that are being proposed with the current model of voice. But I think all those things are possible if we can achieve that first goal, which is being put out and discussed at the moment, of a voice at the Commonwealth level. Now, there are other conversations being had, and there's different perspectives within the community. There's some perspectives that instead of a path to voice being the first thing we should be doing, we should be having a path to treaty as the first thing that should be happening. And then from there, that could lead to voice, and it could also lead to truth outcomes. That's one way of looking at things. I also hear other voices out there saying that perhaps instead we should be starting with truth instead, and that can lead to outcomes around voice, and that could lead to outcomes around treaty. So there are different things that people are discussing around how we could achieve that goal. I've also heard other conversations that rather than having a pathway to the voice at the level that it is being proposed, what we should really be doing is campaigning to have a pathway to a much more powerful voice. And I think that's also a valid conversation to be had. So there are these conversations that instead of the current proposal to have a referendum around voice, we should be having a conversation first around treaty, a conversation first around truth, or a conversation first around a much more powerful voice. And I think those are all valid points, and I would love the idea that we could achieve all those things. And I'm not too bothered, to be honest, about what the order is. I think all of those things are really powerful things to achieve on our goal to getting to the top of the mountain, to achieving those rights under UNDRIP. But I think we also need to be really mindful of what we're actually being offered at the moment. And so at the moment, the Commonwealth Government, rightly or wrongly, have decided that their preference is that we start with the voice. And they've put in processes in place to try and get us to that voice. There's a whole lot of work being done. There are details out there around this. I know there's some concerns some people have around what are the details, what's it going to mean for our community, some concerns as well as around what does that mean for our sovereignty. And my understanding of look at these things, that there's no way that the Commonwealth can pass legislation or change the Constitution in a way that affects our sovereignty as First Peoples. Sovereignty is only something that can be ceded by us ourselves. It doesn't matter what the Constitution says. Sovereignty, the ceding of that, is entirely up to us as sovereign people. So I'm not concerned around that, but there are details out there. I'm also aware that when you are looking at the Constitution, you don't want all the details in the Constitution. It's about the principle. And so at the moment, the Commonwealth Government has said, yes, we are interested in this principle of ensuring that there is a voice for First Nations peoples here in this country. My concern is with all these other voices, all these other conversations, if it turns out that somehow we're not able to achieve this voice through this current referendum, that's going to make it a lot harder for us to then progress to treaty, because we won't have that starting point of having a voice. It's going to make us a lot harder to get to truth conversations. And I also think that if this voice campaign is not successful, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden in the next year there's going to be a different conversation around treaty. I think that's going to be a much harder path. History has shown us that when referendums fail, you don't turn around the next year and have a whole new referendum on a similar kind of thing but slightly different. It takes decades at times to have a new referendum about these things. So I'm very hesitant of this idea that we shouldn't support the voice, because hopefully in the future we'll be able to have conversations around treaty instead, or around truth instead. To my mind, the best chance we have of achieving voice, treaty and truth is to take the opportunity that is in front of us, the one that is being offered to us, and grasp that opportunity and get a voice for our people. So that's what I think is really, really important. As I said, there's lots of other views out there, lots of other information out there. I encourage everyone to go and find out lots of different information that is out there. If you want to know more specifically about what is happening with the voice, I encourage you to go and look up the information about the Uluru Statement and From the Heart. And if you're interested in more specifically what's happening here in Victoria, then have a look at the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. And as I said, if you are eligible, please sign up to enrol to vote for the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria and have your voice here in the process in Victoria. But hopefully that was useful to just get that perspective, really encourage conversation and discussion. And if you've got information that might help change my mind, please share it with me. I'm more than happy to have those conversations. Thanks. Well, look.